Bad Blood of Johnny Snake Eye. Western fiction by Daniel Belay. Narration by Natural Reader. He was known as Johnny Snake Eye, a half-breed Apache, although Snake Eye was not his birth name. The imposed name was given to him later by many of the members of his tribesmen that knew his reputation, which means an eye to move or lie like a snake and deceiving others. This was true even after he lived among the whites, which then exhibits his occupation as a card shark and other assorted thievery activities, not to mention his appetite to kill, especially with the use of his razor blade knife and six-shooter. His true name was Johnny Jackson, a lone child born of an Apache Indian woman. His father was a white settler and a big game hunter by trade. They had a small homestead along the Verde River in the Verde Valley Wilderness area of the territory of Arizona. Most of the time his father was gone for days and weeks on his big game excursions in northern Arizona. That was just fine with Johnny. His father was hard on both him and his mother, especially when the man was solidly drunk. At the age of 14 his mother had just enough of her husband's abuse, and when her husband left on another hunting excursion the mother and Johnny left their homestead behind and she took her son to live among her tribe on the Apache reservation. At the age of 18 Johnny Snake Eye was forced to run off to be on his own after thinking that he had killed a tribesman and the fear of the tribe's wrath that would come next. That was because of one event that involved a knife fight with a jealous native of his age tier, named Red Hawk. It was over an Indian woman they both wanted selfishly for their own selves. In the conflict both took their share of gashes, but towards the end Red Hawk got it good with Johnny's blade lodged deep into his ribs. Johnny thought for certainly Red Hawk would had died, but yet he manages to survive after that incident and is very much alive of what Johnny knows now. Johnny started off living of the land for a short time and eventually adopted by a small group of renegade Apaches that were hiding in the canyon. They were barbarians, thieves that attack and mostly kill white travelers to steal from them, or forced to trade for their lives. Johnny was the youngest and fair-looking of the older ugly savage bunch. They taught him to become a warrior and it came natural to him. He lived that life for a few months until the U.S. cavalry intervened and killed off most all the renegades. Johnny Snake Eye was wounded in the engagement, but he manages to sneak off during the conflict and disappear. Short time afterwards Johnny quietly head back to his former tribe one night to secretly visit his mother. She warned her son that Red Hawk is very much alive and now a mighty warrior. She went on to say that Red Hawk is demented with hatred for him and has a death curse on Johnny, and he swear with reverence to find him one day and cut out his heart. His mother told Johnny it is not safe here and he should leave here before they learn of his very presence here. She asked Johnny to go back and live among the whites and learn more of their ways. Her mother stated, "You know their language well and you have lived among them while growing up." Johnny decided to take his mother's advice. He need to change his way of life. 4 years passed from the time he had first left the tribe and Johnny had not seen Red Hawk as of yet. Johnny fears that he will show up one day and try to violently end his life, not unless he ends his opponent first. Within that 4 years living among the white settlers Johnny became a card shark and fairly good at it, at least before some person or more caught on to his dishonest deception. He also done other things of whereabouts. He had swindled people out of their earnings, even had took lives to get it. In most all cases he had killed to get out of a dangerous confrontation and nearly ending his own life in the process. Yet with Johnny's profession of a card shark and his lengthy time in the barrooms it became quite often he gotten drunk. His intoxication has caused himself frequently to get into brawls, knife fights as he was good at, or even a fair amount of gunplay with nearly death experiences, not to mention the numerous jail time he had. Regularly enough Johnny spent a fair amount of time traveling to different towns and hitting the saloons. He usually stay a spell until they caught on to his card cheating, or being kicked out of a town for provoking trouble, which in some cases being part Apache didn't help him much among the whites. Also moving around different places would make it harder for Red Hawk to find him. On May 24, 1881 Johnny Snake Eye was in the town of Devil Rock Ridge and was at the saloon sitting at a table having a poker game with a few locals there. Johnny was drunk and with offensive attitude as usual and was doing well, winning big. It was time for him to quit for the day and he comes up from his chair to gather up his winnings from the table when suddenly a card slipped out of his sleeve and fell to the table. The bearded large fellow that just lost to him saw the whole thing. He stood up and shouted, "You fucking drunken filthy half-breed, you are nothing more than a dirty-faced cheater." With rage the large fellow thrust the big table over on its side and began to soar at Johnny. Immediately Johnny drew his knife. In the conflict Johnny had taken a few beatings by the large fellow before Johnny finally manages to drive the blade several times into his large opponent's gut, enough times to drop the man dead. In a sudden move, Johnny watched and saw that the bartender started to reach for his shotgun from under the bar, and Johnny instantly drew his gun and shot at him twice, killing him. Another losing card player from behind Johnny had also drew his gun on him, determined to shoot Johnny in the back. He fired it as Johnny instantly turned around to face him. The young man manages to send one into Johnny with a wound to his left shoulder arm. Johnny had barely enough time to return fire before the second one left the barrel. The second bullet more than grazed Johnny in his left side of his lower ribs, but Johnny's slug got his opponent square in the heart. The injured Johnny quickly pointed his pistol in the direction of anyone that dared to draw their guns on him next. Johnny was feeling the pain in his side and mostly in his left arm, which both were bleeding considerably. So he forced his arm tight against his ribs in order to ease the pain. Thereafter Johnny ordered the others that were facing him to drop their weapons onto the floor and to have them weapons kicked toward him. Much after that, Johnny slowly moved backwards through the slinging doors of the saloon into the street with the pistol still pointing in the direction of the onlookers and adversaries that would love to see him dead. Nonetheless, when Johnny turned around on the street, he instantly stared at the town sheriff with a shotgun pointed straight at his chest. His deputy was also across the street with his rifle pointed at him. The sheriff gave Johnny two options, and in his hurt and weak condition Johnny had no other choices than give himself up to the law. Johnny knew at the time it would been better to surrender and get his wounds attended to sooner in jail than trying to prolong his injuries while fleeing, and if he fled, that of course would never happen because Johnny would be dead by the two lawmen in an instant upon his second option. Johnny was asked to toss his gun and his large dagger into the ground and have them kicked towards the lawmen. Next, Johnny started to smart off at the sheriff, which was not a good thing to do in his predicament. It had triggered the sheriff to take immediate action towards Johnny. With the butt of the shotgun, the sheriff slammed it hard into Johnny's ribs, which caused him to arch over, and then another hit to the side of his head to knock him into unconsciousness. Dripping blood had covered the whole side of Johnny's face as he lay there in the street. The sheriff began to question witnesses of what Johnny Snake Eye was involved in. The comatose body was then dragged down the street over the shoulders of two fellows and taken to the jailhouse. The doctor was sent for to attend of the care of Johnny's wounds. Johnny Snake Eye was in a coma state as the doc worked on him, cleaning up the blood and bandaging his wounds. He did not come out of his coma until hours later. Yet, while resting in his cell, recovering from his wounds, Johnny knew certainly that he was destined to be dangling from a rope, either by a court order, or a lynching mob, whatever comes first, which means Johnny need to figure out quickly how to escape out of his predicament that he got himself into. Judged in a court of law. 3 days later, on May 31, 1881, Johnny Snake Eye Jackson was tried locally in the court of law. The jury listened to the testimony of a number of witnesses, then speedily reached a decision. They found that the defendant, aged 22, Johnny Snake Eye Jackson, was guilty of first-degree murders for the stabbing death of Jack O'Connor, aged 52, the shooting deaths of Damian Zach Myers, aged 22, and George Wells, aged 57, owner and barkeeper of Devil Rock Ridge Saloon. The panel of adjudicators concluded that the defendant was caught red-handed cheating at cards, and he was also consumed with amount of whiskey during the shootings occurred. The convicted defendant was given the death penalty by Judge Manfred, which was set for June 4. Johnny Snake Eye deplorably waits for his day of execution. A wooded scaffold was in the works, being built for his hanging. However, in the late hours of the night of June 3, 1881, Johnny Snake Eye Jackson managed to escape from his cell. He had already spent 6 days in the city jail and was fairly healed up of his gunshot wounds. Taking flight. Due to an unexpected incident Johnny Snake Eye would achieve in cutting the jailer throat, stealing his keys and escaping from his cell in the late hours of the night. According to rumors, Johnny had 2 inhospitable visitors earlier that night of June 3. 2 drinking buddies from the local saloon where Johnny had his troubles had come at his outer cell to provoke him. It was their way of wishing Johnny Snake Eye a farewell for his next day trip to the scaffold, where he would have been executed. However, the intoxicated adversaries were foolish enough to carelessly leave behind an empty liquor bottle near Johnny's cell. Johnny manages to obtain the bottle, smashed it at the base and formed it as a weapon, using his Indian-style convention to plot his escape. The fugitive rapidly fled into the Bradshaw Mountains, losing the posse. He eventually headed back down in a northwestern direction, which took him to the rowdy town of Weaver. It was there for nearly 4 months that he hid under the shield of a fondly known prostitute. In that time frame the law has put out warrants for his capture, dead or alive, and numerous wanted posters were posted in the surrounding area. In his concealment in Weaver, Johnny had many sleepless nights with bad dreams of being tormentingly killed by his revengeful enemy, Red Hawk. Some of his nightmarish visions saw himself gravely shot by one or more of the likes of bounty hunters. It was the forthcoming before the preordained of Red Hawk's deadly curse. Johnny feared and had believed that the visions are true and his untimely end is imminent. Unfortunate for him, it did just that. During his concealment, Johnny Snake Eye has come face to face on 2 occasions with money-hungry bounty hunters that had seek him out in the lawless town of Weaver. One was a close call for Johnny. He was informed and warned ahead of time by an acquaintance of his at the standing bar. With that information, Johnny manages to turn the table, by bushwhacking and eliminate the bounty hunter without getting himself shot. However, the second time Johnny was not so lucky. It was one dark raining night when the intoxicated Johnny stepped out of the saloon into the muddy street, where he was immediately ambushed. He was met by this tracker that had rushed out in the open. It was quick and Johnny didn't see it coming because of the blinding rain. Johnny took a solid hit with a bullet in his right lung, which went through and exited out his back, sending him down immediate into the sloppy mud. The adversary next attempted making his way towards Johnny through the muddy slush in order to finish him off with perhaps several more bullets. The rain did not help much for the assassin's vision as he walked closer to his trophy. That gave Johnny time to yank himself on his side forcefully and fired his pistol. He manages to get one bullet off before collapsing into unconsciousness. With luck, that bullet killed his opponent before his assassin has a chance to fire a number of shots into him. The severe wounded Johnny Snake Eye was carried and rushed back to his rented small single room, in which his prostitute lady friend provided for him when he first came to town. It was on the 3rd story of one of the brothel houses in Weaver. The town doctor was summoned to provide immediate medical aid to Johnny's life-threatening state. There were days after that not knowing if Johnny would hang on much longer. Many of his friends thought he should had died by this time, yet Johnny manages to slowly survive day by day and has gained some of his strength back, but still had serious health complications. His right lung was damaged beyond hope. He had series of breathing difficulties and coughing out blood. Johnny knew his end is near. Johnny stayed hidden in his room to the very end and had never ventured out and kept under low profile. His remaining days he had sat most of his time in front of the small table in his room, basically playing cards alone and drinking whiskey from his bottle to ease his pain. He was drunk most of the time. Johnny Snake Eye kept himself shirtless, showing his old soiled bandage upon his chest, and he was sweating with fever, let along the hot days that kept the room heated. Of course there were some kind of relief for him as the windows were open wide for fresh air and occasional breeze. Johnny's temperament and harsh behavior got out of control towards his final days, mainly from his hard drinking, painful sensation, and self-pity of knowing he is dying. This has caused his lady friend and other associate to leave him to himself. The last person, a drinking partner, has visited him and had play a few cards with him. Johnny Snake Eye, feeling suicidal, forced the fellow to play a game of Russian roulette, by giving his own pistol to his partner with one bullet in the chamber, forcing him to spin the barrel and press the pistol against Johnny's heart. The nervous fellow was forced to pull the trigger, and it was repeated 3 times as Johnny held his partner's arm down on the table and a blade pressed upon the fellow's arm with his other hand to get the fellow to follow through. None of the bullets had fired, and with nearly the 4th attempt the poor fellow tossed the pistol to the floor. Johnny let the man go and in anger forced him to leave the room. That was his last visitor Johnny had until the dark night of September 28, 1881, the night of Johnny Snake Eye's brutal death. No one had knew what time of night it was of the incident, except all night long there was a lantern lit up upon Johnny Snake Eye's room. His door was kept locked, so apparently the slayer made himself up by scaling the walls of the building and came in through the wide open window of Johnny's room. However, we do know this, that the killer was an Apache because of the nature of the kill. Yet, it was verified later by Johnny's lady friend and a few others, stating that Johnny Snake Eye had a death curse on him, and it was strongly believed it was Johnny's fear enemy, Red Hawk. What we best know is that Johnny was sitting at the table and was drunk, and most likely was dozed off into the table when Red Hawk came into the room through the window. Red Hawk made himself around in back of Johnny where he was sitting and grabbed his hair to raise Johnny's head up. We know there was some struggle going on as Johnny tried to break loose. From behind, Red Hawk had covered Johnny's mouth with his left hand to keep him from screaming, and with his other hand had quickly brought his large razor-edge knife around to Johnny's front and butchered him with deep cuts numerous times in the chest and guts until he was dead. Then Red Hawk cut him open wide and cut out his heart. It was 3 days after the deadly incident when they discovered Johnny Snake Eyes' corpse in his room. No one visited him until someone complained about the smell of the bad odor along the hallway near his room. When couple fellows forced the door open to the room, they saw a bloody stiff corpse, sitting upwards in a chair against the table. Blood was all over the place. Flies were buzzing around the corpse, and the odor of the body was enough to make a person to faint. The remains torso was split wide open with the organs spilling outwards, and of course the heart was missing from the body. Johnny Jackson Snake Eye was only 22 of age when he died. Johnny Snake Eye's corpse was wrapped in canvas and buried in a hollow grave, covered with rocks at the cemetery in Weaver. The room was soaked down with buckets of water and whatever it took to get rid of the smell. The room never was rented thereafter and was kept locked except on some occasions. Some say of that time after the incident the room was haunted with Johnny Snake Eye's spirit, that many strange things occur in the room, even including hearing Johnny's voice screaming. Years later the whole building caught on fire and had burned down. The end. Western fiction by Daniel Belay. Narration by Natural Reader.